The rope was cutting into her wrists. That was the first thing Elias noticed as lightning ripped the sky above my ranch, tearing the darkness with jagged, blinding light. A small figure, barely more than a silhouette against the raging storm, was tied to my fence post, soaked to the bone in the worst weather Montana had seen in years. I'd been out checking on my cattle, the wind howling like a banshee, when a sound carried on the furious gusts made my blood run cold. It wasn't the usual panicked lowing of frightened animals, nor the creaking groan of ancient wood battling the gale. This was different. Human. A soft, almost imperceptible whimpering that barely managed to rise above the thunder's deafening roar. I wiped the incessant rain from my eyes, my hand trembling slightly, and pushed forward each step, a battle against the wind, trying to rip my coat from my shoulders. What I saw when I finally got close enough made me question my sanity, made the rational world I lived in tilt on its axis. A girl. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old, bound tightly with thick, unforgiving rope to the weathered wooden post near my main gate. Her dark hair, long and matted, was plastered against a face so pale it looked ghostly in the intermittent flashes of lightning. Her clothes, what little remained of them, were torn and caked with mud, offering no protection against the biting cold. But it wasn't just the sheer unthinkable cruelty of leaving a child out in this monstrous weather that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was her eyes. Even through the deluge and the oppressive darkness, even with raw fear and profound pain etched across her small, fragile features, those eyes held something I had never in all my 50-odd years witnessed before, an intelligence that seemed to burn right through me, a chilling, almost alien intensity. It was as if she wasn't just looking at me, but calculating, measuring, understanding things that most adults, myself included, couldn't even begin to grasp. It was unsettling, terrifying, and utterly captivating all at once. Jesus Christ. I muttered the words torn from my throat by the wind, my voice hoarse with a mixture of shock and burgeoning rage. My hunting knife was already out its familiar weight, a small comfort in the escalating nightmare. Hey there, little one. I'm going to get you free. The moment my blade honed to a razor's edge, even brushed against the sodden rope, she recoiled with a sudden violent spasm that caught me entirely off guard. Her mouth opened in a soundless scream, a silent, guttural cry of pure terror that resonated deep within my chest. Her whole body shook, not just from the bone-deep cold that must have permeated her, but from an unadulterated primal fear that radiated from her like a palpable heat. She wouldn't look directly at me, her gaze darting frantically around the swirling chaos of the storm, as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. She wouldn't let me touch her, flinching away from my outstretched hand as if I were a monster. But those brilliant, unnervingly intelligent eyes never stopped moving, never ceased their relentless scanning, processing, analyzing. I'd lived alone on this isolated ranch for 15 years, a solitary existence carved out of the vast Montana wilderness. I knew wounded animals when I saw them, the broken leg of a deer, the fear in a coyote's eyes caught in a trap. But this child, this was fundamentally different. The way she flinched from my touch, the almost rhythmic pattern of rocking she fell into, once the ropes were finally severed, the chilling fact that she hadn't uttered a single word yet, somehow I could feel her intelligence. It was like the oppressive heat radiating from a blacksmith's forge, a powerful unseen force. "Who did this to you?" I asked softly, my voice barely a whisper against the storm's fury. I crouched down, keeping a respectful distance, trying not to alarm her further. "Who left you out here?" She didn't answer. Instead, she began making soft, repetitive clicking sounds with her tongue, a strange, rhythmic cadence that was both unsettling and oddly mesmerizing. Her gaze was fixed, unblinking, on the mathematical pattern of raindrops hitting the growing puddle beside her. Her small, delicate fingers moved in the air, tracing invisible shapes with a precision that made my chest tighten with a strange, inexplicable ache. It was as if she was seeing something I couldn't, a hidden order in the chaos. Thunder crashed directly overhead, a deafening roar that vibrated through the ground, shaking the very air around us. In that moment, a decision solidified in my mind, a choice I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone would irrevocably alter the course of my solitary life. "Come on," I said, my voice firmer, now cutting through the remnants of my shock. "Let's get you warm and dry. We'll figure out the rest later." But as I gently, cautiously led her toward the distant, flickering light of my cabin, a profound sense of unease settled over me. It wasn't just a rescue. The tire tracks in the mud near my gate were fresh, too fresh for the storm, too deliberate. Someone had specifically chosen my ranch, my fence, this remote, isolated location. Someone had wanted me to find her. The question, a cold, insidious tendril of dread, began to coil in my gut. A question that would haunt me through the long, agonizing night ahead. Why? The cabin, usually a sanctuary of warmth and quiet solitude, felt like a tomb after I finally managed to coax the girl inside. She stood pressed against the heavy oak door, her small frame rigid with tension water dripping steadily from her clothes onto my worn wooden floorboards. Her eyes, those unnerving, brilliant eyes, darted frantically between every corner, every shadow, every possible escape route. The way she moved, the way she held herself, reminded me of a wild Mustang I'd once seen newly captured. Beautiful, intelligent, but ready to bolt at the first sign of danger, a creature of pure, untamed instinct. "It's okay," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, trying to project a calm I didn't entirely feel. "No one's going to hurt you here. You're safe." But when I reached, slowly, deliberately, for a clean towel from the kitchen counter, she made that sound again. The same soft, rhythmic clicking pattern, but faster, now more urgent, laced with a new, sharper edge of panic. And then she did something that made my blood run cold, a chilling display that defied all logic and understanding. She began counting, not out loud, not with audible words, but her lips moved in perfect, synchronized precision with each raindrop that struck the window pane. 1, 2, 3. Her fingers, those impossibly precise fingers, traced complex mathematical sequences in the air, while her eyes, wide and unblinking, tracked each individual drop with an almost mechanical, inhuman precision. I'd seen autism before. My old neighbor's boy had it, a sweet kid, but his counting was a comfort, a routine. This was different. This girl wasn't just counting raindrops, she was predicting them. Her fingers would move a split second, an infinitesimal fraction of time before each drop actually hit the glass. It was as if she could calculate the exact trajectory, the precise timing of chaos itself, bending the unpredictable to her will. "How are you doing that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. A profound sense of awe and terror warring within me. She finally looked directly at me then, her gaze locking onto mine, and in that moment, I felt like I was staring into the very mind of something far beyond human comprehension. Her mouth opened slightly, and for a fleeting second I thought she might speak, might offer some explanation for the impossible. Instead, she simply pointed. Her small, trembling finger, still damp from the storm, directed my attention to my coffee table, where I'd carelessly left yesterday's newspaper. The headline, stark and bold, read, "Gifted children vanishing across 3 states. FBI investigation continues." My stomach dropped with a sickening lurch. The paper was folded in such a way that only those specific words were visible, a deliberate, precise arrangement. I was absolutely certain I hadn't left it like that, which meant a low, guttural rumble of a truck engine vibrated through the distant, rain-soaked landscape. My ranch was 20 miles from the nearest neighbor, a desolate stretch of winding, unpaved road. Nobody drove these roads at night, especially not in a storm like this. Nobody. The girl's eyes, already wide with an almost unbearable intensity, widened further, the pupils dilating with raw, unadulterated terror. She began backing slowly, deliberately toward the rear window, her movements fluid and silent like a wraith. That clicking sound, the rhythmic cadence, became rapid fire, now almost like a frantic Morse code, a desperate signal. But it wasn't random panic. Even in her profound fear, there was purpose, a chilling, intricate pattern. An intelligence operating at a level that made my head spin, threatening to unravel my very perception of reality. "They followed you here," she whispered, the first words she'd spoken, and they cut through me like a blade, sharp and cold. Her voice was small, fragile, but crystal clear, carrying an undeniable weight of truth. "They always follow." "Who follows?" I demanded, my own voice tight with a sudden surging fear. I moved quickly to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. 3 sets of headlights like predatory eyes were winding their way up my long, treacherous mountain road. "People who think smart children are weapons," she said, her voice eerily matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the mundane details of the weather. "People who take us and make us solve things we shouldn't solve." The trucks were closer now, their engines a throbbing pulse in the night. I could make out the unmistakable gleam of government plates even through the driving rain and the oppressive darkness. Whatever this girl was, whatever impossible capabilities she possessed, someone very powerful, very dangerous, wanted her back. But as I reached instinctively for my old hunting rifle, the worn wood cool against my palm, the girl did something that stopped me dead in my tracks. She moved to my kitchen table, her movements quick, precise, almost mechanical. She began arranging my salt and pepper shakers, the sugar bowl, and the napkin holder in a complex, intricate pattern, a silent, dizzying ballet of everyday objects. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice laced with bewilderment. "Calculating," she said without looking up, her focus absolute. "There are 17 ways they can approach this cabin. I'm finding the one they won't expect." 17 ways. My jaw dropped. I looked out at my property, the familiar contours of the land. The barn, the fence lines, the rocky outcroppings. I'd lived here for 15 years, knew every inch of this land, and I could maybe identify 6 good approach routes. The engines were getting louder now, a menacing growl that vibrated through the floorboards. And this 10-year-old girl, this fragile, terrified child, was about to teach me that everything I thought I knew about intelligence, about survival, about what was truly possible, was profoundly, terrifyingly wrong. The girl finished her intricate pattern with the kitchen items, her small hands moving with an almost surgical precision. Then she looked up at me, her impossibly bright eyes locking onto mine. "They'll park behind the big oak tree in 47 seconds. 2 men will circle left toward the barn. 1 will go right to the generator shed. The leader will come straight to the front door." I stared at her, my mind reeling, struggling to process the sheer impossibility of her words. How could she possibly know that? "Because people follow patterns," she said simply, her voice devoid of emotion. A chillingly logical explanation. Tactical approach doctrine is just mathematics with guns. Before I could even begin to process the implications of what she had just said, before I could even formulate a coherent thought, headlights swept across my front window, bathing the room in a sudden harsh glare. The girl had been off by exactly 3 seconds. "My name is Lyra," she whispered, and something in her voice, a sudden profound vulnerability, made my chest tighten with a painful ache. "If they take me back, I'll never see Nova again." I had fought in Afghanistan. I had seen what desperation looked like etched on the faces of soldiers and civilians alike. But this child's fear was different. It was the fear of someone who understood exactly what awaited her, calculated down to the smallest, most agonizing detail. A heavy, authoritative knock shook my front door, vibrating through the very foundations of the cabin. "Federal agents, open up." Lyra moved with startling speed, a blur of motion, to my old dusty bookshelf. Her fingers, still tracing invisible patterns, now ran along the spine of an old mathematics textbook I'd bought years ago but never opened, its clear dust jacket protecting the pages. "This equation is wrong," she muttered, her voice sharp, almost angry, as she pointed to a complex formula visible through the plastic cover. "The solution creates infinite regression. Impossible." "Lyra, we need to focus," I urged, my voice strained, my eyes darting between her and the splintering door. "No," she said sharply, her head snapping up, her eyes blazing with an almost manic intensity. "The equation matters. Everything matters. That's what they don't understand." The pounding on the door grew more insistent, more violent. "We know you're in there. We're here for the child." I grabbed my rifle, the familiar cold steel, a small comfort. But Lyra caught my arm with surprising strength, her small hand gripping me with an unyielding force. "Violence won't work," she said, her voice calm, chillingly rational. "They have thermal imaging body armor and backup 20 minutes away. But they don't have this." She tapped her temple, a gesture of profound, almost arrogant confidence. "What exactly can you do?" I asked, my mind reeling, a desperate hope clinging to her words. Lyra's expression grew sad, older than her 10 years, should allow a profound weariness settling over her features. "I can see how things work. All things, weather patterns, human behavior, mechanical systems, mathematical relationships. It's not magic, Elias. It's just seeing." The front door exploded inward with a deafening crash, splinters of wood flying through the air like shrapnel. I heard the heavy thud of tactical boots on my porch, the muffled shouts of men. "The back window, Elias." "Lyra," said her voice, suddenly urgent, cutting through the chaos. "We have 38 seconds before they complete their perimeter." "Lyra," a man's voice called out from outside, smooth and deceptively calm. "We know you're frightened, but you're safe now. Dr. Thorne wants to help you." Lyra's face went white, a sickly pallor replacing her already pale complexion. Thorne, she whispered the name, a venomous hiss on her lips, laced with a profound visceral terror. He's the one who had me tied up. He's the one who's been taking children like me. My blood boiled, a sudden searing rage consuming me. He left you out there to die. Not to die, Lyra corrected, her voice clinical, detached, a chilling echo of Thorne's own cold logic. To be found. By someone isolated. Someone who'd feel protective. The realization hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left me breathless. You mean? I've been studying you for the last hour. Lyra continued, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, as if relaying a scientific observation. Your reaction time. Decision-making patterns. Emotional triggers. Thorne is testing whether I can turn empathy into control. Heavy footsteps surrounded the cabin, now a rhythmic thump of boots on the muddy ground. Lyra looked directly into my eyes, and for the first time since I'd found her, she looked like the terrified child she actually was, stripped bare of her impossible intellect. But here's what Thorne didn't calculate, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't want to be a weapon. And neither do you. The back door exploded inward with another violent crash. Lyra grabbed my hand, her small fingers surprisingly strong, her grip unyielding. Trust me, she said, her voice firm, resolute. I know the way out. Lyra led me through my own cabin as if she'd lived there for years, every creak of the floorboards, every shifting shadow, every hidden nook and cranny intimately known to her. She moved with an uncanny grace, a silent, fluid motion that kept us invisible to the thermoscopes I now knew were sweeping through my windows. How do you know my house better than I do? I whispered, my voice hoarse with a mixture of awe and disbelief, as we crouched low behind my worn leather couch. I memorized the architectural layout from outside, she replied, her voice a soft murmur. Standard ranch construction built in 1987 based on the foundation settling patterns. Electrical conduits run here, plumbing there, load-bearing walls. She paused, her eyes darting, processing. I can't turn it off, Elias. My brain just sees everything. 3 men in tactical gear moved through my kitchen with military precision, their movements practiced, efficient. Their leader was tall, thin, wearing wire-rimmed glasses that made him look more like a college professor than a federal agent. Dr. Thorne. Lyra. Thorne called out, his voice conversational, almost jovial, but with an underlying current of steel that sent shivers down my spine. I know you can hear me. Your heart rate is elevated. I can see it on the thermal imaging. But you're not in immediate danger, so your cortisol levels are manageable. You're thinking clearly. Lyra's hand tightened on my arm, her grip almost painful. He's right, she whispered, her voice laced with a bitter understanding. That's how he controls us. He turns our intelligence against us. Thorne stepped closer to our hiding spot, his eyes scanning the room with a predatory gleam. You've had 6 hours of freedom, Lyra. Tell me, what have you learned? To my utter surprise, Lyra stood up. She simply walked out from behind the couch, her small figure appearing in the dim light as if she were surrendering. I learned that kindness exists, she said, simply, her voice clear and unwavering. Thorne smiled. It was the coldest, most utterly devoid of warmth expression I had ever seen, a chilling mask of calculated amusement. Interesting. And what mathematical principle does kindness follow? That's what you never understood. Lyra replied, her voice stronger, now more confident, a defiant edge to it. Kindness doesn't follow a formula. It's chaos. Beautiful, unpredictable chaos. I remained hidden, my grip tightening on my rifle, my knuckles white. Something was happening here that I didn't understand, a subtle shift in the power dynamics. Chaos is just incomplete data, Lyra. Thorne said, his voice dismissive, condescending. We've discussed this. He gestured to his men. Mr. Davies, please come out. We know you're there. I emerged slowly, my rifle raised its barrel, glinting faintly in the dim light. She stays with me, I stated, my voice low and steady, a challenge in every word. Thorne laughed, a short, sharp bark of amusement. Mr. Davies, you have no idea what this child is capable of. In the last 6 months, Lyra has solved energy equations that stumped MIT for decades. She's predicted weather patterns with 99.7% accuracy. She can calculate human behavior like a computer program. She's a little girl, I countered, my voice thick with anger. She's a weapon, Thorne corrected, his eyes glinting with a chilling pride. The most powerful weapon ever created. Do you know what she did in our last test? Lyra's eyes filled with tears, a raw, vulnerable pain distorting her small face. Don't tell him, she whispered, her voice pleading. But Thorne continued, oblivious to her anguish. She calculated the exact psychological pressure points needed to convince her own mother to abandon her. One conversation, Mr. Davies. Lyra analyzed her mother's financial stress, marriage problems, and emotional vulnerabilities, then manipulated her into signing custody over to our program. I felt sick, a wave of nausea washing over me. Lyra, you. I didn't want a Lyra, whispered, tears streaming down her face, her voice choked with a profound sorrow. But they said if I didn't cooperate, they'd take other children instead. Children who couldn't protect themselves like I could. Thorne pulled out a tablet, its screen glowing faintly, displaying surveillance footage of children, young faces, some smiling, some looking lost. 23 gifted children, Mr. Davies, all between ages 8 and 12, all with abilities that defy conventional understanding. Lyra is our most successful acquisition because she understands the game. I looked at Lyra, this small, fragile girl who could predict chaos but couldn't stop her own tears. What game? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Survival, Thorne said, his voice a cold, hard pronouncement. Lyra knows that cooperation keeps her alive. Resistance gets her terminated, just like the others who thought they could outsmart us. Lyra wiped her eyes, her small hand trembling, and looked directly at Thorne, a new defiance hardening her features. You made one calculation error, Doctor. Oh. What's that? Thorne's eyebrow arched in a gesture of amused condescension. Lyra smiled, a faint, almost imperceptible curve of her lips, the first genuine smile I'd seen since I found her. You assumed Elias would be afraid of what I can do. But he's not afraid. He's angry. Thorne's frown deepened, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his face. What does that change? Everything, Lyra said, her voice ringing with a newfound conviction. Because angry people don't follow patterns. They create new ones. I didn't fully understand what Lyra meant. Not logically, but I felt the profound truth of it in my bones. These people had tortured children, had turned intelligence into imprisonment, had made weapons out of gifts. My anger, a cold, simmering rage, was a force I rarely unleashed, but it was building now, a storm within me mirroring the one outside. Thorne reached for his radio, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency, ready to call for backup. But as his finger moved toward the button, Lyra spoke one word, sharp and clear, cutting through the tense silence. Now. The moment Lyra said now, every light in my cabin went out simultaneously. Emergency lighting, electronics, even the digital clock on my microwave. Everything died, plunging us into absolute suffocating darkness. What the hell? Thorne barked into the sudden void, his voice laced with shock and genuine alarm. I heard Lyra's soft clicking sounds again, a rapid-fire cadence in the inky blackness. But this time I understood. She wasn't just making noise. She was counting down. 10, 9, 8. She's been planning this the whole time, I realized, with a sudden breathtaking surge of amazement, a profound respect for her impossible intellect. At 0, my old backup generator, usually a reliable but predictable roar, thundered to life. But instead of restoring normal power, the electrical system began behaving like it had a mind of its own. Lights flickered in specific, unsettling patterns. The radio crackled with feedback that sounded almost like Morse code, a desperate, garbled message. Even my old television, dormant for years, began cycling through channels by itself, a ghostly parade of static and fleeting images. Impossible, Thorne whispered, his voice laced with a chilling mix of awe and terror. Lyra, you can't control electronics remotely. You're right. Lyra's voice came from somewhere in the darkness, calm and clear. But I can calculate power grid fluctuations. I can predict when lightning will strike. And I've been watching your equipment for the last hour, learning its weaknesses. Lightning struck my property at that exact moment, a blinding flash followed by a deafening crack that shook the very ground beneath us. A massive power surge coursed through every wire in the cabin. Thorne's tactical team cried out, grabbing their heads, their electronic equipment smoking and sparking, acrid fumes filling the air. Their night vision is fried, Lyra explained calmly, her voice a beacon in the darkness. Thermal imaging too. They're operating blind now. I moved instinctively toward Thorne's voice, my rifle raised, ready to act. But Lyra caught my arm, her grip firm. Not yet. There's something else you need to know. More lights began flickering in that same strange rhythmic pattern. I finally recognized it. The mathematical sequence Lyra had been tracing with her fingers when I first found her tied to that post. You've been sending a message, I breathed, a profound realization dawning on me. To the other children, the ones Thorne has imprisoned. I've been teaching them how to break free, Lyra confirmed, her voice filled with a quiet, fierce determination. Thorne's radio crackled to life with panicked voices distorted by static. Base, this is Team 7. We've lost contact with 3 facilities. Equipment failures across the board. The subjects are static. Cut off the transmission. Lyra's voice grew hard, older than her 10 years should allow, imbued with an almost terrifying authority. 17 facilities, Thorne. 86 children. I've been calculating escape routes for all of them since the day you took me. That's impossible. Thorne snarled, his voice laced with fury and disbelief. You were isolated. No communication. I communicated through weather patterns. Cloud formations. Lightning strikes, Lyra, explained, her voice rising with a triumphant edge. You taught me that intelligence is a weapon. You forgot that weapons can be turned against their makers. I heard the distinct sounds of vehicles starting, voices shouting frantic orders. Thorne's tactical teams were retreating, his entire operation falling apart around him. But in the chaos, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Lyra was getting paler by the second, her small face ashen. A thin trickle of blood began to seep from her nose. Lyra, what's happening to you? I asked, my voice filled with a sudden, desperate fear. Using my abilities this intensively, it has costs, she whispered, her voice weak-strained. My brain isn't designed to calculate this many variables simultaneously. Thorne's voice cut through the darkness with cruel satisfaction, a chilling triumph. That's right, Elias. Lyra's brain is burning itself out. She can save those other children, but she'll die in the process. Is that really what you want? I knelt beside Lyra as she collapsed, her small body trembling. Her brilliant eyes, usually so sharp and focused, were starting to lose their intensity, their light dimming. There has to be another way, I said desperately, my heart pounding in my chest. Lyra smiled weakly, a faint, fragile curve of her lips. There is, but it requires something I've never been able to calculate. What's that, Faith? Lyra's breathing was becoming labored, each breath a shallow, painful gasp. But her eyes, though dimming, remained focused on me with a laser intensity, a desperate plea. Faith, I repeated, my mind racing, trying to grasp the impossible concept. What do you mean I can calculate everything except random human choice? She whispered, her voice barely audible. The moment when someone acts without logic, without pattern, without self-interest. Her voice grew weaker, fading. Thorne's whole system depends on predictability. But you're chaos. He can't control. Thorne stepped closer, his tactical team regrouping. Despite their damaged equipment, their forms barely visible in the gloom. Mr. Davies, be reasonable. Lyra will die if she continues. Surrender now and I'll get her medical attention. I looked down at this extraordinary child, this brilliant, vulnerable girl who had trusted me with her life. Then I thought about the 86 other children trapped in Thorne's facilities, children who were counting on Lyra's impossible plan, on her sacrifice. How do I help? I asked, simply, my voice firm, resolute. Lyra smiled through her pain, a faint, almost ethereal light in her eyes. Do something completely illogical. Something I couldn't predict. Something Thorne would never calculate. My mind raced a frantic scramble for an answer. What would be completely unpredictable? What would shatter Thorne's carefully orchestrated operation? His world built on patterns and control. Then it hit me, a sudden blinding flash of inspiration. Instead of fighting or fleeing, instead of doing anything a rational person would expect, I did the last thing anyone would anticipate. I walked directly toward Thorne, my hands raised slowly, deliberately, in a gesture of surrender. You win, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion, a carefully constructed lie. Take the girl. I'm done. Thorne smiled coldly, a triumphant, predatory gleam in his eyes. Smart choice, Mr. Davies. Men secure the subject. But as Thorne's soldiers moved toward Lyra, their heavy boots thudding on the floor, I spun around my rifle, a blur in my hands. I emptied its entire magazine into my own backup generator, the one Lyra had just used to weaponize the storm. Sparks flew, a blinding shower of light in the darkness, as the backup power died, plunging us back into absolute suffocating blackness. You destroyed your own escape route, Thorne shouted, his voice laced with utter confusion, his carefully constructed world crumbling. That makes no tactical sense. Exactly, Lyra whispered from the darkness, her voice stronger, now clearer, like my unpredictable action had given her exactly what she needed. A jolt of pure, untamed energy. He just created true chaos. No calculations, no patterns, pure human unpredictability. In the darkness, I heard Lyra's clicking sounds again, but this time they were different. Stronger, more resonant, like she was conducting an orchestra. Only she could hear a symphony of destruction and liberation. Lightning began striking my property in rapid succession, not random chaotic strikes, but calculated ones, each bolt hitting with surgical precision. The power lines leading to Thorne's vehicles, the radio tower on the distant hill, the backup communication systems Thorne's team had established. She's weaponizing the storm. Thorne breathed, his voice a chilling mix of awe and terror. Lyra's voice carried clearly through the thunder, amplified by the storm's fury. You taught me that intelligence is power, Thorne. But you never understood that power shared is power multiplied. I felt something brush against my hand. Lyra's fingers warmed despite everything she was enduring, her touch a lifeline in the chaos. The other children, she whispered, her voice filled with a profound joy. They're free. All of them. Your unpredictable action broke the pattern that was keeping them trapped. Thorne's radio crackled with frantic reports, a cacophony of panicked voices. Facilities going dark across 3 states, children disappearing. A coordinated escape that shouldn't have been possible. Impossible. Thorne snarled, his voice raw with fury. There's no way 86 children could coordinate without communication. They didn't need communication. Lyra explained, her voice triumphant, ringing with the truth. They needed hope. And hope is the most unpredictable force in the universe. Through the chaos, I heard vehicle engines starting, the desperate roar of trucks trying to escape. Thorne's team was retreating, their operation in complete collapse, shattered by a 10-year-old girl and an old rancher's illogical act. But Thorne himself wasn't giving up. If I can't have you, Thorne shouted into the darkness, his voice thick with a desperate, unhinged rage. No one can. I heard the distinctive, chilling sound of a grenade pin being pulled. Thorne was going to destroy everything, my cabin, Lyra himself, rather than lose control. Lyra squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. One more unpredictable choice, she whispered urgently. Trust me completely. No questions. No hesitation. When I say jump, you jump. The grenade hit the cabin floor with a metallic clink, its small, deadly form rolling silently in the darkness. Elias, Lyra said quietly, her voice calm, clear, imbued with an absolute certainty. Jump. Without thinking. Without calculating. Without any logical reason. I threw myself and Lyra toward the shattered front window, a desperate, illogical leap into the unknown, just as the world exploded behind us. I hit the muddy ground hard, the impact jarring every bone in my body. Lyra was tucked protectively against my chest, her small body surprisingly resilient. My ears rang from the deafening blast as my cabin, my home of 15 years, erupted in a fiery inferno behind us. Debris rained down around us. Splintered wood, twisted metal, shattered glass. But somehow, miraculously, we'd landed in the exact spot where the flying shrapnel couldn't reach us. How did you know? I gasped, my voice hoarse, my ears still ringing from the explosion. Lyra looked up at me with those brilliant eyes, now clearer and more focused than ever, their light shining with a newfound wisdom. I didn't know, she said, a faint smile gracing her lips. That's what made it perfect. For the first time in my life, I chose faith over calculation. Through the smoke and the flickering flames of my burning cabin, I could see Thorne's team retreating down the mountain road, their vehicles speeding away like frightened insects. Their operation was finished, utterly destroyed. Thorne himself was nowhere to be seen. Whether he'd escaped in the chaos or been caught in his own explosion, I couldn't tell. Lyra struggled to her feet, steadier now that the intense mental strain was over, the blood from her nose having stopped. The other children are safe, she said, her voice filled with a quiet triumph. I can feel it. They're with families now. People who will protect them. What about you? I asked, my gaze sweeping over the ruins of my home. Where will you go? Lyra looked around at the smoldering remains of my cabin, then up at the clearing storm clouds, the first stars beginning to peek through the retreating darkness. I've spent my whole life being told I was too smart, too different, too dangerous to be normal. But you know what I learned tonight? What's that? Being smart isn't the same as being wise. And being different isn't the same as being alone. She turned to me, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay. I promise I won't calculate your behavior anymore. Much. I laughed, a raw, ragged sound, despite everything we'd just been through, despite the loss of my home. You want to live on a ranch with a grumpy old cowboy. I want to live somewhere I can use my gifts to help instead of harm, Lyra said, her expression growing serious. Somewhere I can learn to be a kid sometimes. But you should know, she added, her eyes suddenly grave, they'll come looking for me again. People like Thorne don't give up easily. I looked at this extraordinary child. This brilliant, resilient girl who had saved 86 others while nearly destroying herself in the process, who had turned her greatest perceived weakness, her inability to predict human kindness, into her greatest strength. Let them come, I said firmly, my voice filled with a new resolve. This ranch could use some security improvements. I bet you could calculate some pretty effective defensive positions. Lyra grinned a wide, uninhibited smile, and for the first time since I'd found her tied to that fence post, she looked like exactly what she was, a 10-year-old girl who had finally found home. 6 months later, my rebuilt cabin featured the most sophisticated early warning system in Montana, designed by a young genius who could predict weather patterns with astonishing accuracy, but still couldn't figure out why my pancakes always burned on Sunday mornings. Some mysteries, Lyra had decided, were better left unsolved. Dr. Thorne was eventually arrested by a joint FBI task force after the freed children, now safe, and with new families, provided testimony that couldn't be ignored. The secret program was disbanded, and new laws were passed protecting gifted children from exploitation. Lyra thrived on the ranch, using her abilities to help local farmers optimize their crops and predict harsh weather, saving them countless dollars and heartache. She attended school via video link, but spent her afternoons learning to ride horses and milk cows, ordinary childhood experiences that no amount of calculation could have prepared her for. And sometimes when storms rolled across the Montana sky, I would find Lyra on the porch, not calculating the lightning patterns, not predicting the chaos, but simply watching the rainfall, her eyes wide with wonder, finally learning to be amazed by chaos instead of trying to control it. There are moments in life when we're faced with situations far beyond our understanding or control. The story of Elias and young Lyra reminds us that intelligence and calculation, no matter how powerful, can never replace compassion, courage, and faith. Lyra, though gifted with extraordinary abilities, had to learn that people are not mathematical formulas, and that kindness defies all logic. And Elias, a man scarred by war and years of isolation, discovered that true strength comes from empathy and one deeply illogical choice, a choice that saved not just one child but countless others. The lesson here is profound in a world that often feels programmed and predictable. It's those tender, unpredictable moments, a helping hand and open heart, that create miracles. Never underestimate the power of goodness and human decency. They can change the course of destiny itself. Enjoying these epic Wild West stories? Hit subscribe for more gripping tales of bravery, conflict, and unexpected heroes. Now tap the video on screen to experience a story with a twist you'll never forget.